You're sitting on a plane, staring out the window. Everything looks completely normal. But here's something almost nobody realizes. That plane is not full of fuel. In fact, it usually takes off with far less than it could actually carry. So, here's the question that probably just popped into your head. Wouldn't it be safer to just fill it all the way up? Wouldn't extra fuel mean extra security? Turns out, no. And the wild part is that doing exactly that could be dangerous, inefficient, and brutally expensive. Let's break down why. More fuel doesn't mean more safety. It all starts with an idea that sounds logical but isn't. More fuel equals more safety, right? Not in aviation. In the air, more fuel equals more weight, and that changes absolutely everything. A commercial aircraft like the Boeing 777 can hold over 180,000 liters of fuel. That's roughly 140 tons of fuel alone. Now picture this. If you topped off that plane completely for a short flight, you'd be hauling tons of dead weight for no reason. And what happens when a plane is heavier? It needs more thrust to take off, more runway, and most importantly, it burns more fuel. Sounds backwards, but it's true. Weight kills efficiency. This is one of the most important concepts in aviation. Weight kills efficiency. Every extra kilogram demands more thrust. More thrust means more fuel burned. More fuel burned means more money spent. And it adds up fast. A plane can burn anywhere from 2,500 to 6,000 kilos of fuel per hour, depending on the model. Now imagine carrying 10 extra tons that weren't even needed. That alone can translate into thousands of dollars lost on a single flight. Precision, not guesswork. Here's where it gets interesting. Airlines don't operate on a just-in-case mentality. They run extremely precise calculations. Before every single flight, the exact amount of fuel needed gets calculated. Not estimated, calculated almost down to a science. Factors include flight distance, headwinds or tailwinds, aircraft weight, passenger count, flight route, and possible diversions. On top of that, a mandatory reserve is always built in. A commercial flight never takes off without backup fuel. Enough to reach the destination, enough to divert to an alternate airport, and at least 30 to 45 extra minutes of flight time. They don't cut it close, they cut it exact. When a plane can land, now here's something a lot of people have seen and never understood. A plane takes off. Something goes wrong. It has to turn back, but it doesn't land right away. Instead, it circles in the air. Why? Because it's too heavy to land safely. Every aircraft has two critical weight limits: maximum takeoff weight, MTOW, and maximum landing weight, MLW. And here's the catch. Takeoff weight is always higher than landing weight. An Airbus A380, for example, can take off at around 575 tons, but it can't land at that same weight. It has to be significantly lighter. So if an emergency forces it back down right after takeoff, it has two options: circle in the air burning off fuel, or dump fuel directly in the sky. Yes, fuel dumping is real. At airports like LAX or JFK, it's not unusual to hear aircraft dumping fuel before landing on air traffic chatter, simply because the plane is too heavy to land. Which tells us something clear. Filling a plane all the way up isn't always helpful. Sometimes it's actually a problem. Tankering, fueling up for money. Not safety. There's also something called tankering. This is when an airline deliberately loads extra fuel for financial reasons. Say, fuel is cheaper in Toronto than at the destination, so the plane fills up more there to avoid buying pricier fuel elsewhere. But even this has limits, because loading too much extra fuel means burning more fuel just to carry it, which can end up costing more than it saves. Why the wings matter? Let's talk about the wings for a second, because they're part of this story too. Fuel is mostly stored inside the wings. Why there? Because it helps balance the aircraft, and because the wings are engineered to handle a certain amount of weight. Fill them up completely, and you're putting extra stress on the structure. They're built to handle it, sure, but that doesn't mean it's necessary to push it that far. It all comes down to money. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where it all clicks. Fuel makes up between 20% and 30% of an airline's operating costs. It's one of the biggest expenses there is, and every single kilogram counts. Shaving off just 1 ton of weight can save thousands of dollars a year per aircraft. Multiply that across an entire fleet, and you're talking millions. That's exactly why airlines do things like use lighter meal carts, cut weight from seats, optimize flight routes, and avoid loading unnecessary fuel. Even long-haul flights don't max out. Long-haul flights do take off with a lot of fuel. Sure, but even then, they don't necessarily load to the max. A flight from Toronto to Dubai might carry over 100 tons of fuel, but that number is still calculated down to the exact amount needed. Not a drop more, not a drop less. And weather plays a role too. Headwinds increase consumption, turbulence does too, and storms might force a diversion. That's why fuel calculations change for every single flight. No two flights are identical, strictly regulated, not left to chance. And here's the key part. None of this is left up to a pilot's gut feeling or an airline's whim. International regulations, organizations like ICAO, and authorities like the FAA require mandatory minimum reserves. So no, airlines aren't gambling. They're operating with precision. What if planes always flew full? Here's something worth thinking about. If planes always flew with a full tank, they'd be less efficient, slower, and more expensive to operate. In some cases, they wouldn't even be able to take off from certain airports, especially short runways or cities with high temperatures, since hot air reduces engine performance, making weight an even bigger problem. And that's where it all connects. Planes don't fly full of fuel because they don't need to, because it would be inefficient, because it would cost more money, and in some cases, because it simply wouldn't be safe. Fuel even affects balance. Here's something almost nobody thinks about. Fuel also affects the aircraft's center of gravity. If it's not distributed properly, the plane can become unstable. That's why automatic systems transfer fuel between tanks during flight. Everything is calculated. Everything is controlled. So why are the tanks so big then? If you're wondering why the tanks look so massive if they're rarely filled all the way, the answer is simple. Flexibility. For long-haul flights, for emergencies. It doesn't mean they're always topped off. A plane doesn't fly with a full tank. It flies with exactly the fuel it needs to be safe, efficient, and cost-effective. Nothing more. Nothing less. One last twist. Fuel doesn't always weigh the same. But there's one more detail almost nobody imagines. Aircraft fuel doesn't always weigh the same. When it's cold, like in Canada or Iceland, fuel becomes denser and weighs more per liter. When it's hot, it expands and weighs less. That's exactly why airlines don't load fuel by volume. They load it by exact weight, since a mistake here could throw off the entire flight plan. And here's the key detail. Modern aircraft measure fuel in kilograms, not liters, because weight is the only thing that truly matters. At the end of the day, everything in aviation revolves around weight. It decides how much fuel gets burned, whether the plane can take off, and even whether it has to circle the sky before it's allowed to land.